What could drive a 33-year-old woman to pick up a knife and turn on her own parents, transforming a loving home into a chilling crime scene? At exactly 8 a.m., a frantic 911 call pierced through the silence. The voice on the other end, trembling with terror, belonged to a father. His words jagged. Desperate. My daughter. She stabbed me. She stabbed us. When authorities arrived at the modest home, they were met with a scene so chilling it would haunt even the most hardened first responders. Inside, the air was thick with a metallic scent blood. The living room was in chaos. Furniture overturned, a broken lamp flickering dimly. In the center of it all, a man lay motionless, multiple wounds carved into his chest, at least 7 deep, deliberate stabs. He was pronounced dead at the scene. His wife, barely clinging to life, was found nearby, her body twisted in pain, soaked in crimson, whispering one name through bloodied lips: Christina. Christina Adams, 33 years old, had been living with her parents for years. Neighbors described her as quiet, polite, a little withdrawn. But behind closed doors, something darker had been brewing, something far more sinister than anyone imagined. Reports would later reveal that a confrontation had erupted that morning. Her parents, concerned about her behavior and financial instability, had asked her to consider moving out. It was a conversation that had occurred many times before, but this time, something snapped. Christina allegedly retrieved a kitchen knife, ordinary in design, extraordinary in its role that day, and turned it into a weapon of fury. The attack was sudden, brutal, and executed with such rage that investigators believed it had been building for a long time. She did not flee. Instead, she waited silent, cold, as police surrounded the house. When officers entered, they found her standing in the kitchen, hands stained, eyes hollow, her face unreadable. She surrendered without resistance, as if she knew what she had done was irreversible. But the question remains, why? What festering resentment could lead a daughter to slaughter the very people who gave her life? Was it mental illness? A moment of psychosis, or a long-harbored hatred that finally reached its boiling point? Detectives dug deeper, uncovering fragments of a fractured relationship, disputes over money, accusations of manipulation, emotional volatility. Yet nothing could fully explain the horror of what had transpired. As the community reeled, struggling to comprehend the atrocity, media outlets dubbed it the Morning of Madness in Ocala. The story gripped the nation not for its gore, but for its haunting question: how does love turn lethal? Christina Adams now awaits trial, facing charges that could imprison her for the rest of her life. Her mother, though alive, may never recover physically or emotionally from the trauma. And the house on that quiet Florida street, it stands silent once again. But now it holds the weight of a story so dark, so unexpected, it chills the spine of anyone who dares to remember. The tension before the terror, what drove Christina Adams over the edge. Before blood stained the walls of a modest Florida home, before sirens shattered the suburban silence, and before a daughter became the prime suspect in a gruesome attack, there was the conversation. It began in early August, an ordinary day cloaked in quiet tension. Christina Adams, 33 years old, was living with her parents in Ocala. She had struggled for years, troubled past criminal records, a shattered employment history, and haunting memories of abuse. But this house, her childhood home, had been her last refuge. Then, everything shifted. Her father, without warning or warmth, told her she had 6 weeks to leave. No discussion, no empathy, no support, just a deadline: 6 weeks to disappear. He said it was to make room for a more stable family member, a brother with a steady job, someone who hadn't stumbled like Christina. That word stable hung in the air like an accusation. Christina was stunned. She had expected concern, maybe even a gentle push toward independence. What she got instead was a cold ultimatum. When she tried to explain her past traumas, her criminal record, the doors slammed shut. In every job interview, her father cut her off. "That's not my problem," he said. Those 5 words echoed in her mind for days. What was once a home quickly transformed into a prison of resentment. The walls closed in. Her father's gaze turned distant. Her mother, always quiet, said little. There were no offers to help her find work, no effort to find her a place to go. just silence and the ticking clock counting down her final days under that roof. The atmosphere inside the house shifted almost imperceptibly at first. Meals were eaten in silence. Doors were closed with a little more force. Every creak of the floorboards became a warning sign. Christina began to isolate herself, withdrawing into a mental space filled with fear, anger, and betrayal. And then came the pressure. 6 weeks. That's all the time she had. But time, when paired with hopelessness, doesn't pass. It crashes down like a falling ceiling. Christina didn't have savings, no job, no connections. Every option felt like a dead end. Each night she lay awake staring at the ceiling, haunted by her father's words. Not my problem. Was she a burden? An embarrassment? Did her parents truly believe she was disposable, day by day? The distance between them grew. What started as tension spiraled into a suffocating silence. Christina felt invisible. But inside her, something dark was stirring slowly, quietly, like a storm building on the horizon. She began to unravel. The rejection had cut deep, not just because of what was said, but because of who had said it. The very people who once held her as a baby now turned their backs on her with icy detachment. By mid-August, Christina's emotional state was fragile, frayed at the edges. Her once rational thoughts had become clouded by paranoia and grief. Every glance from her father felt like judgment. Every passing day, a reminder that she was unwanted. She wrote in her journal obsessively, not about revenge, but about pain, loneliness, feeling like a ghost in her own home. But even the act of writing couldn't quiet the rising storm. And then came the moment when despair turned into something else. As the deadline approached, her fear hardened into fury. She wasn't just scared, she felt betrayed, alone, unheard, unseen. And in her mind, that silence screamed louder than any argument ever could. What no one realized was this: Christina wasn't planning her exit. She was unraveling. And no one, not her father, not her mother, not even herself, could see what was coming next. But soon the world would. Because in just a matter of days, the house in Ocala would become the scene of a crime so shocking, so unthinkable, that the town would never forget it. And it all began with a simple sentence: "You need to leave." The night before, a silent message and a storm brewing. The night before, the blood spilled, before cries echoed through the walls. Something small, something seemingly mundane set everything in motion. Christina Adams returned home late that evening. She had gone out alone, just a quick grocery run. The air was heavy, the kind of stifling humidity Florida summers are infamous for. But the real tension wasn't outside. It was waiting behind her own front door. As she approached the house, something felt off. The back door, the one she always used, was slightly ajar. Not wide open, but not quite shut either. The lock, a familiar friend she had clicked shut hundreds of times, wasn't in its usual place. It had been tampered with, adjusted. Wrong. She froze. It was a subtle detail, but it screamed violation. Christina's eyes scanned the porch, then the doorway. No signs of a break-in, no shattered glass, just that misplaced lock, and a strange chill in the air. Then she stepped inside. Something else was different. The hum of the air conditioner, usually steady and warm, was now ice cold and sharp. The thermostat had been reset. A home that once felt familiar was now unfamiliar, unwelcoming. And then she saw it. A single piece of paper folded, pushed halfway under her bedroom door. No envelope, no name, just a hastily scribbled note, unsigned but unmistakably from her father. The words were simple: "You need to be out soon. This can't wait." No greeting, no explanation, no empathy, just another cold reminder. To anyone else, it might have seemed like a logistical nudge. But to Christina, it was a dagger, a silent assault. Her own father, once a protector, had reduced their relationship to a piece of paper. No conversation, no eye contact, just this. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she replayed every word her father had said over the past month, every cold glance, every silence at dinner, every time he walked past her as if she weren't even there. The betrayal sank deeper. That house, once filled with memories, now felt like a trap. The walls that once held her childhood now seemed to close in. The note was just the final push, a trigger that shook whatever fragile composure she had left. At around 5:00 a.m., Christina Adams stirred awake, her body rising from bed with a mechanical sense of routine. The alarm buzzed softly, pulling her into another day she wasn't quite ready to face. But she got up anyway. There was no scream in the air, no thunder in the sky, just the soft shuffle of slippers on tile, the purring of her cat, and the flicker of her phone's screen. By 6:30 a.m., she was doing laundry, folding clothes, sorting socks, staring blankly at the spinning drum of the washing machine. But behind her eyes, the memory of the night before was replaying on a loop. The note slipped under the door, the unspoken rejection, her father's cold instructions to be out soon. It hadn't left her. If anything, it had grown sharper overnight. Then came the phone call. It was her mother responding to a question about laundry. But before she could hang up, her mother added, "Your father wants to talk to you." Those words, simple, harmless, triggered something deep inside Christina. Another confrontation. Another reminder that she was no longer welcome. The air changed the moment he walked in. The conversation, if it could be called that, was not loud, but it was final. "You need to leave. Tomorrow." That was the moment something inside her snapped. Christina later told detectives her emotions were like a blackish-reddish mix, a storm of fury and despair swirling behind her eyes, and in that moment, everything else fell away. Without another word, she walked out of the room and began to prepare. Took a knife. She claimed it was for self-defense, and a taser. Her movements were fast, fluid, not manic, but intentional, calm even. What she carried wasn't just steel and electricity. It was the weight of years of pain, of silence, of never feeling seen. At around 8:00 a.m., Christina approached her father. He was seated at his computer, perhaps answering emails, perhaps completely unaware of what was coming. She crept behind him. Then, without warning, she struck. The taser came first, a sharp jolt of voltage that paralyzed his movement. He gasped, twisted in his seat, and before he could scream, she lunged. The knife flashed again and again, at least 7 times. Each strike was deliberate, brutal, aimed at ending a life that had once given her her own. Blood splattered across the desk, the monitor, the carpet. A moment later, her mother's voice pierced the chaos. "Christina, what are you doing?" But there was no answer. Christina turned as if on instinct and stabbed her mother once in the chest. The woman fell gasping, blood soaked through her shirt, but she was alive. And just like that, it was over. Christina didn't panic. She didn't run. She changed her clothes, tossed the bloodied ones into the washing machine, this time without soap. She washed the knife in a bleach water mix, then placed it in a bag of ice in her car. Like nothing had happened, but something had happened, something irreversible. Inside that house, 2 parents lay bleeding. One was clinging to life, the other slipping away. Then at 8:02 a.m., a call came through. It was Christina's father. Despite his injuries, despite the pain, he managed to dial 911. His voice was weak, shaking, but he made sure to get the words out. "My daughter. She stabbed us." He gave the description of her car, a silver Ford Taurus, before the line went dead. First responders rushed to the scene. They found him and his wife still conscious, barely. Blood soaked the carpet. The room reeked of metal and chlorine. But they were alive. For now. They were rushed to the hospital. The father wouldn't make it. The mother would survive. But the scars, emotional and physical, would never heal. Officers were dispatched immediately, lights blazing, tires screeching as they raced toward what they thought was just another domestic disturbance. But what they would uncover inside that quiet suburban home was something far more chilling. When they arrived, they found both victims, Christina Adams's parents, still alive, but barely. Her father was soaked in blood, collapsed by his computer desk, multiple stab wounds gouged into his chest. Her mother, also wounded, had collapsed in the hallway, her blouse stained, red eyes wide with terror but still conscious. Police issued a BOLO, be on the lookout for the silver Ford. Christina was arrested shortly after without resistance, calm, blank, as if she had already accepted what came next. The quiet girl from Ocala, the one who played with her cat and studied fictional languages, was now at the center of a real-life horror story. A daughter, a victim, a suspect, a storm. The town would never forget her name, and for everyone who asked why, there were no easy answers, only a chilling truth. Sometimes the most terrifying stories don't begin with screams. They begin in silence. Both were rushed to the hospital. Back at the scene, police began piecing together the first fragments of a nightmare. The house was eerily clean, too clean. There was bleach in the sink, a washing machine running quietly in the background. A faint scent of ammonia lingered in the air. There were no signs of forced entry. Only one name stood out: Christina Adams. Within the hour, police located her vehicle on a nearby road. Inside the silver Ford Taurus, Christina sat behind the wheel. Her wife was in the passenger seat, confused, unaware of what had just taken place. Christina was calm, too calm. She surrendered without a word. At the station, the initial interrogation revealed a tangled web of inconsistencies. Christina claimed she had woken up around 5 a.m. She said she had spent the morning playing with her cat, watching movies, scrolling on her phone, and studying High Valyrian, the fictional language from Game of Thrones, on Duolingo. She mentioned laundry. She even spoke about going to Publix to buy ice, but the details didn't add up. She said she went to the store alone, but receipts suggested otherwise. Her wife, still stunned, said she didn't recall going anywhere that morning. Christina claimed she was just doing chores, yet her phone history showed no activity until well after the estimated time of the attack. Detectives pressed further. The story shifted. Cracks began to show. And then finally, it broke. Christina exhaled slowly. Her voice dropped. She admitted it. Yes, she had attacked them. Yes, she had brought the knife. Yes, she had used the taser. The motive: a piece of paper, a note. She described how her father had slipped a message under her bedroom door the night before, telling her she needed to leave the house. There was no conversation, no empathy, no warmth, just a blunt command and a locked door. She felt humiliated, betrayed. And then came the morning reminder, that cold, final conversation. You need to leave, tomorrow. Something inside her fractured. Christina told detectives she didn't plan it in advance, not really. But the decision came fast, and when it did, it consumed her. She dressed in long sleeves and gloves to protect herself, she said. She brought a knife for self-defense and a taser just in case. She approached her father quietly as he worked at his computer. She struck with the taser first, rendering him vulnerable. And then with terrifying force, she drove the knife into him. 7 times, each strike more desperate than the last. Her mother ran into the room, screaming. Christina turned and drove the blade into her chest once. She didn't stop to cry. She didn't panic. Instead, she cleaned. She removed her clothes, tossed them in the wash. She ran bleach over the knife and placed it in a bag of ice. She said she didn't really know what she was going to do with it next. Maybe throw it away, maybe keep it. There was no clear plan. Just chaos. She put on clean clothes, got into her car, and drove off with her wife without saying a word about what had just happened. Later in her confession, Christina called herself a sociopath. She said her emotions were uncontrollable. That morning, she claimed, was a blackout of rage and despair. I wasn't thinking like a normal person, she said. Investigators noted that while her actions were brutal, they weren't entirely random. There was an eerie logic behind them. Gloves to hide prints, cleaning up the scene, trying to destroy evidence. But her calm demeanor after the crime, that chilled even the most seasoned detectives. There were no tears, no remorse, just facts. And now my father is dead. A mother was scarred for life, and a daughter, one who had once been quiet, odd, but seemingly harmless, was facing a future behind bars, haunted by the silence she'd unleashed. As news of the crime spread, neighbors were stunned. They had seen Christina walking her cat, heard her laugh with her wife in the yard. No one suspected what she was capable of. No one imagined that behind the suburban calm, a ticking time bomb had been waiting to explode. The house remained standing, but its halls, once filled with family, now echo with silence. The kind of silence that holds secrets. The kind of silence you don't forget. And at the center of it all, Christina Adams, a daughter, a killer, a storm that no one saw coming, the mind behind the blade, what drove Christina Adams to snap. Every horror has a backstory. Every storm begins with a whisper. And behind the brutal stabbing that shocked the quiet streets of Ocala, Florida, lies a tangled web of emotional scars. Unspoken resentment and a fractured mind on the edge of collapse. Christina Adams wasn't a stranger to darkness. She had been living with her parents, dependent, unsettled, and drifting in a life that offered little promise. Her past wasn't clean. Her criminal record, dating back to 2009, included theft and drug-related offenses. These marks on her history followed her like shadows, making jobs scarce and stability almost impossible to hold on to. But her parents had grown weary. In early August, her father delivered an ultimatum. Christina had 6 weeks to leave the house. It wasn't a conversation. It was a command, cold, final, delivered without warmth, without discussion. When Christina pleaded, sharing how her past made it difficult to survive, her father cut her off. "That's not my problem." Those words weren't just cold, they were crushing. They ignited something inside her, a deep ache that simmered over weeks, morphing into silent fury. To Christina, it wasn't just about being asked to leave. It was about being cast out by the very people who should have protected her. She felt disposable, like an old photograph fading and forgotten in a drawer nobody opened anymore. Worse, there was no plan, no offers to help her relocate, no money, no guidance, no empathy. She was alone, and she knew it. As the days ticked by, her anxiety tightened around her like a vice. Depression sank its claws deeper. She stopped trusting the world outside her head. Her thoughts became jagged, looping endlessly around the same questions. Why me? Why now? Why this way? Inside her journal, she scribbled about pain, about feeling invisible, about being rejected by her own blood. And then came the trigger. A note. One evening she came home to find the back door slightly tampered with. The temperature inside the house was colder than usual, and on the floor beneath her door lay a folded piece of paper, a note from her father. Again, no conversation, no face-to-face courage, just ink on paper. "You need to be out soon." That was it. No goodbye, no emotion, just another reminder that she was being pushed out like clutter. That note, more than anything, broke whatever was left of her self-control. By that point, Christina was already spiraling. She described herself as emotionally unstable, a self-declared sociopath ruled by impulses. And that final push, it sent her over the edge. She later told investigators that the attack wasn't planned days in advance, but evidence showed otherwise. That morning, before the blood, before the screams, she prepared. She put on long sleeves, gloves, packed a taser, and took a kitchen knife. To her, it was protection. To everyone else, it was preparation. She claimed she was acting out of self-defense, an act of desperation, not of malice. But the sequence of events said otherwise. Christina walked into that house with tools, not tears. She didn't cry when her father reminded her to leave. She didn't scream when he dismissed her pleas. She simply moved. She struck. 7 times, with precision, with force, with finality. The anger, the abandonment, the buildup of years came flooding out in those seconds. It wasn't random. It wasn't blind. It was a release. And yet the second her mother ran in, everything changed. Christina only stabbed her once. Detectives would later suggest that this wasn't part of the plan. It was a reaction, a desperate move to silence a witness. One sharp motion, not a flurry. Afterward, Christina didn't run away. She didn't scream. She changed clothes, washed the weapon, tossed the bloody garments into the washing machine, and added bleach to the sink. She left the house calmly and drove off with her wife, who, according to reports, had no knowledge of what had just occurred. During her interrogation, Christina shifted between clarity and chaos. At times, she sounded coherent, detailing how she had woken early, played with her cat, even studied Valerian on Duolingo. But other moments were disjointed, confused, like her mind was fractured into pieces she couldn't put back together. Eventually, the truth came out. She admitted it all. The rage, the stabbing, the cleanup. She said she wasn't herself, that her emotions controlled her, that the rejection layered with years of trauma and isolation had twisted her into someone else. But in the end, no explanation could undo the horror. No apology could unstab those wounds. A man was dead, a woman nearly died, and a family was shattered beyond repair. All because of silence. All because no one listened until it was too late. Christina Adams didn't just lose control that day. She lost herself, and in the process, left behind a trail of blood that would stain her name forever. Christina Adams sat under the fluorescent glow of the interrogation room. Eyes, distant, voice unsteady, and emotions twisting like smoke. What she said and what she didn't painted a picture more chilling than any confession alone could offer. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I love my wife." It was one of the few moments that sounded human, regretful, broken. But in the same breath, Christina pointed fingers at her parents, blaming them for her dissent. She claimed they gave her no support, no understanding. In her eyes, their rejection had sealed her fate. She called herself a sociopath, not once, but multiple times. She described her emotional state as blackish-reddish, a swirl of rage and confusion that took over like a possession. But this wasn't a diagnosis from a doctor. It was her own label worn like armor, or an excuse. Detectives listened carefully. They noticed the inconsistencies. At first, she claimed she had simply run errands, gone to Publix, and bought ice. But the details slipped. She couldn't recall if her wife had joined her. She wasn't sure about the timing. She stumbled over her own story until the threads unraveled completely. It was then that the truth bled out. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Her confession wasn't just a surrender, it was a puzzle of contradictions. One moment she claimed she never meant to hurt anyone. Next, she described how she brought gloves, long sleeves, and weapons. The investigators didn't push with force. They used silence, gentle pressure, letting her own lies trap her. And they did. But beyond the crime, another disturbing note crept into the conversation. Somewhere amid the horror, Christina spoke of sports betting apps DraftKings Bet365. She said they ruin lives, that they hook the weak, draining their wallets and sanity. It was jarring, out of place, but perhaps a glimpse into her spiraling mind. A desperate attempt to shift the narrative, a cry for help too late, or just another loose thread in a mind unraveling. Whatever it was, one thing became clear: this wasn't just about rage. It was about a woman at war with herself. A woman who could say, "I'm sorry," and "it's their fault" in the same breath. And when the dust settled, the most terrifying truth wasn't just what she did. It was that she believed she had no choice. At first glance, it seemed like another tragic headline. But peel back the layers and the Christina Adams case reveals a haunting truth about family mental strain and the silent wars waged inside broken homes. Christina wasn't just a criminal. She was a symbol of something deeper, an adult still tethered to childhood dependencies, struggling to survive in a world that never gave her a fair chance. Living under her parents' roof, weighed down by a criminal record, and unable to find steady work, she had become a prisoner of stagnation. Her father's demand to leave within 6 weeks wasn't just a rule, it was a rupture. A cold command without compassion, without guidance, and it shattered whatever thread of stability Christina was clinging to. The emotional toll was devastating. She didn't feel guided, she felt discarded, and that sense of abandonment, it became a trigger. What followed was a crime that danced between impulse and calculation. She dressed in long sleeves, wore gloves, carried a knife and a taser. These weren't choices of someone in a blind rage. These were steps taken with awareness. Perhaps not days in advance, but enough to raise questions. Yet her own words painted a portrait of chaos. She described her state as blackish-reddish, a storm of confusion, fury, and detachment. In those moments, she wasn't planning. She was reacting violently, desperately. But what happened after the bloodshed added another layer of complexity. She washed the knife, changed her clothes, ran a load of laundry. These weren't the actions of someone who lost control. They were signs of a mind still aware of consequences, even if only temporarily. Still, the lack of a clear exit strategy, no plan for the weapon, no escape route, betrayed her unraveling. She was prepared, but not ready. And behind her, law enforcement moved with swift precision. Thanks to the dying words of her father, police identified the suspect within minutes. A silver Ford Taurus, a name, a direction. They found her, and they didn't need to break her down. The detectives didn't yell, they didn't threaten, they waited. And Christina talked. Not because she wanted to, but because the weight of the truth had nowhere else to go. In the end, the case wasn't just about violence, it was about a family that failed to communicate, a system that left a woman untreated, and a moment of madness that could have been stopped if someone had simply listened. The Christina Adams case is a heartbreaking family tragedy where financial struggles, emotional dependence, and unresolved tension led to an irreversible act of violence. This story not only details the events of the case, but also highlights the psychological and social factors involved, such as adult dependency on family mental health challenges and the devastating consequences of strained relationships. Christina's life sentence reflects the severity of her actions and serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of resolving family conflicts peacefully and supporting one another before tragedy strikes.